Good morning, church. It's a privilege to be here in the pulpit today, and I told Pastor Jessica that my paycheck was to see her smiling face looking rested. It's not really, spiritual renewal if you're thinking constantly about what you're going to say to the congregation on Sunday. So, glad for her to have that time off to rest and restore. Now, we just heard a wonderful reading of today's epistle lesson. For those of you who've ever been in positions of hiring someone for a job, you probably realize that the Apostle Paul had some personnel problems that he was dealing with here in the scripture. The presenting issue was that many in the congregation were hesitant to embrace their Christian callings. It seems that most believers didn't feel up to the challenge of discipleship, much less the added burdens associated with leadership in a new startup. Why? Well, to begin, let's consider the context. The Corinthian congregation was established by the Apostle Paul about 25 years after Jesus walked the earth. This means that Paul was writing to people who had no firsthand experience of Jesus' ministry. Their beliefs were based on Paul's experience of Jesus' ministry and his instruction that flowed from these experiences. Given this situation, the Corinthians were starting from go on the Monopoly board. It should not surprise us then that these fledgling Christians lacked confidence in their fitness for ministry. Now let's think for a moment. When was the last time you were in an unfamiliar situation with little preparation for what you were being asked to do? Again, when was the last time you were in an unfamiliar situation with little preparation for what you were being asked to do? While you're gathering your thoughts about personal examples, I'll share an epic example for me. It has to do with traveling to Indonesia in the summer of 1993. This experience is probably the best example I have of being, shall we say, under-equipped for what was a new-to-me experience. I had a good reason for going to Indonesia. The reason was to meet up with my beloved spouse, Stephanie. Check this out. She had moved in with me the previous year. I mean, it wasn't even 6 months. And then she went away to Indonesia for 19 months. This was the one and only time I saw her in that 19-month period. Even my best friends thought I was a fool. She was there in Indonesia to conduct anthropological research in rural East Java. As you may recall, Java is part of the Southeast Asian nation of Indonesia. At the time of the trip, I was living in upstate New York, the wine country, the Finger Lakes area. Java is located pretty much halfway around the world from New York. The time difference is 12 hours. Java is located near the equator, so temperatures can be very hot and humid. During the rainy season, things never completely dry out. She had to throw away her leather shoes because they molded. And it's so hot in the dry season that healthy people never stop sweating. So at the Spencer Nehring house in Castro Valley, we use the phrase Java hot to describe the hottest weather and the spiciest food imaginable. Stephanie successfully seared her taste buds while living there, so she could eat dishes that some Indonesians were even afraid to try. But I, by contrast, was raised in the upper Midwest. My mother's spice cabinet included 2 and then eventually 3 spices. I know that you know what the first 2 were: salt and pepper. The third was garlic powder, which she added when she discovered Chef Boyardee spaghetti and meatballs. Stephanie's friends were emphatic they were very empathetic about my sensitivity to these spices. And I also shared with them that I have a lot of food allergies, things like tropical fruit and nuts. So two of her teacher friends were super sweet, and they made all these really special homemade dishes for me, and they were super tasty, and I loved them. So I don't want to scare anybody totally off of Indonesian food. Just go carefully, tread carefully. If you're from Iowa or the Minnesota or Wisconsin or Illinois. These friends also kindly tried to help me learn a bit of Indonesian. It's a trade language. It's the national language. So even though we were on Java, most people spoke both Javanese and Indonesian, but I didn't speak any of those languages. But one of the English teachers made little flashcards for me, and the two teachers that lived in the home that Stephanie rented with her, they helped me practice my flashcards every day, and they helped me put together survival phrases, just enough to get really in trouble, A notable fact about Indonesian culture is that it's the largest majority Muslim country in the world. It's the largest majority Muslim country in the world, and I find that people all across this country are surprised to learn that. Although I've been able to meet and make friends in the Bay Area Muslim communities, back in 1993, I only knew a few Muslims, and I had not had the opportunity to study Islam. Seriously, in rural Iowa, if you both have Catholics and Protestants in the same town, that was a thing, Perhaps the cultural difference that was most challenging for me in Java in 1993 was the plumbing. Now, the urban areas were fairly modern in those days, and if you had money, you could find some semblance of modern plumbing. But in the rural areas, it didn't matter how much money you had. The rural areas were not as developed. There was, for example, no potable running water in the village where Stephanie lived and conducted her research. The bathroom facilities consisted of a hole in the ground with a bathtub-sized reservoir of water nearby. There were no commodes. So there was, I don't mean to be indelicate, but I want you to understand, there was no sitting down to use the toilet, just squatting like a catcher. Water for flushing, hand washing, bathing, and laundry was scooped out of what I called the cow tank, a reservoir about this tall, about that big around. Now, I was familiar, as the great-granddaughter of Midwestern pioneers, I was very familiar with outhouses that still are found in many farmers' groves and are used during the winter months when the electricity goes out. But a toilet without a way to sit down was quite a stretch for me. All in all, let's just say that my learning curve in Java was pretty much straight up. So I appreciate the challenges that the Corinthians faced, and maybe you can too. Imagine biblical Corinth. It was a bustling international port city situated at the intersection of major international trade routes. People from across the known world traveled to and through Corinth on a regular basis. Think New York City or San Francisco, and some people resettled there. As a result, the culture of Corinth was pluralistic, polytheistic, and sometimes also synchronistic. Greek, Roman, and Eastern religions abounded. The most prominent religion in Corinth and the Roman world was the Roman imperial cult. They worshipped Caesar. Now, the depth of the Corinthians' devotion to Caesar likely had more to do with economic and political aspirations than theological views. Native Greeks worshipped a whole pantheon of gods. The most popular was Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation. I will explain for those who maybe didn't have humanities in college, while trying to keep this sermon rated PG, I'll simply say that the devotees of Aphrodite were likely in violation of the 1st, 2nd, 7th, and 10th commandments, for starters. In addition to the Roman and Greek cults, Corinth was home to a Jewish synagogue, which Paul and a few of his associates, like Prisca and Aquila, attended. That was until he became frustrated with opposition to his beliefs, and he set up a new house of worship, you guessed it, across the street. Resistance to Paul's ministry continued to grow, such that several synagogue leaders prodded the Roman authorities to prosecute him, similar to Jesus, for teaching the worship of God rather than worship of Caesar. But these efforts failed twice. Now, given the stark differences between the beliefs and practices of the early Christians and the other religious groups in the city, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to understand why the Corinthian Christians felt ill-equipped to embrace their callings. They were seen as fools by members of the dominant culture, and they felt like fools as neophyte Christians. To compound matters, the Corinthians presumed that their callings had to align with their credentials. I think we can appreciate their position. After all, the whole idea of how employment search and hire practices work in this country are based on the concept of alignment between calling and credentials. We write resumes, apply for jobs, and participate in interviews in order to convince the hiring agents that we have the proven ability to do the work described in the job description. That said, Paul knew, as most modern bosses have learned, there aren't always enough qualified candidates available to hire from the pool. If one wants to accomplish an organization's mission, one has to be willing to hire people with the potential for success, since those with a proven track record have either retired, died, or are in very short supply. Nevertheless, there are leaders in this world who engage people based more on their potential to succeed than on their track record of success. I love sports, so I bring sports to the pulpit. Think about some of the NCAA basketball coaches that you might have heard of. I'll mention Jan Jensen and Lisa Blutter, recent head coaches for the University of Iowa women's basketball team, and Mike Krzyzewski, head coach of the Duke men's team for many years. Jan Jensen and Coach Blutter coached together for 31 years, and during their shared tenure, Caitlin Clark rose to greatness and went on to be the #1 draft pick in the 2025 WNBA draft. Now, under Jensen's leadership, the Iowa women are currently rated 8th in the nation. In recent interviews, both of the coaches stated that their highest priority in recruiting athletes is a player's coachability and their fit with the Iowa culture of we, not me. Coach K, similarly, the winningest coach in the history of men's college basketball, took a similar approach during his tenure at Duke. Now, Stephanie and I actually have some friends, 2 guys, who played for Coach K, so this is straight from the source. They told us that the way that Coach K chooses athletes for coachability is he looks at how they treat their parents. Yeah. Are they respectful? Coach K knew that if athletes weren't respectful of their parents, they would be very difficult to develop as players. So, coachability is a sports way of talking about the virtue of humility. Those who were raised in the Catholic tradition may recall that humility is considered one of the cardinal virtues in that tradition. Looking more broadly, cross-culturally speaking, humility is considered a fundamental virtue in many philosophical and religious traditions, not just Christianity. It's often described as the foundation or the root of all other virtues. Generally speaking, humility involves a realistic awareness of one's own strengths and shortcomings, a modest view of one's importance, and an openness to learning from others. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 through 31, that last paragraph in the scripture reading for today, Paul explains that humility is a more important quality than any status or accomplishment that a person could achieve in the Christian life. Now, humility may seem like an old idea. It's fallen out of favor in many circles, but it is a virtue worth bringing back. And I would say a virtue worth bringing back, especially among those of us who have enjoyed some level of participation in the dominant first world culture. In fact, I would argue that democracy is dependent upon the embrace of humility. Now, today I'm going to offer just one example of how we could practice humility that may help right the ship in our nation at this time. Now, this is maybe not for everybody, and it's certainly not the only thing to do. But this is an approach, I believe. It is the sine qua non. In Latin, that means the without which not virtue that is necessary to preserve and develop democracy. So here goes. Ponder for a moment, who's in your family? Who's in your family of origin? Who's in your circle of friends? In my life, that is a very purple group. Have any of these people dear to you been sucked into misinformation campaigns claiming that ICE and CBP have only been deployed to arrest undocumented felons? If you have people in your circles that have been hooked by that concept, ask them if they'd be willing to have a conversation with you about the current situation in Minneapolis, St. Paul, or some other area that maybe that you're more familiar with. Explain that they are a person who you love and respect and whose views you are generally interested in learning about. If that's true, explain that you sense that they have knowledge and experience that is a little bit different from yours and that you truly hope to learn from them. Most especially, ask how they arrived at their understanding of this topic. An opening question for the conversation might go something like this. Why, in your view, have 2 U.S. federal immigration agencies been deployed by President Trump to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and several other major U.S. cities? Then listen carefully to their response. Maintain eye contact. Don't interrupt. Ask questions for clarification if needed. Take a few notes. When your conversation partner has finished their thought, ask if they're open to hearing about your understanding and how you arrived at it. If they say yes, proceed. If they say no, look for a different conversation partner. Once you've both shared some of your views, spend a few moments assessing together where there are points of agreement. Make a list of the agreements. Then suggest that you pause the conversation, thank them for their time, and ask for a follow-up conversation. At the second conversation, explore the points of mutual agreement a bit further and identify and dig into one area where your views may differ. Pick the topic where the least difference seems to exist. Start the conversation by checking in with each other. Stay grounded in the relationship. Review areas of agreement, and then open up a conversation about one area of disagreement. Suggest that your conversation partner pick the topic of disagreement and go from there. Remember your manners. Share how you arrived at your view and listen carefully as to how they arrived at theirs. It's good to share facts and sources that you are relying on. Insofar as it is possible, draw from your own experience. Express your position in the language of faith and faith values. Use I statements and explain why X matters to you. Some Christians call that testimony. I know that's a scary word for a lot of progressives. For example, here's one you could start with. I hear you sometimes using the terms illegals or illegal aliens to refer to people in the U.S. who are not full citizens. Gently share that as a Christian, you believe that every person is a child of God. No one is illegal. It's easy for us to become accustomed to using negative terms that are repeated in the news and in general conversations. But since we are people of faith, when the point is made that such terms are hurtful and contrary to our deeply held beliefs, then we can stop using them. I've always felt that these terms were ugly, but I haven't always been able to come up with the terms that were kind or that convey a meaning that the general public would understand. Fortunately, I have been surrounded by great teachers in the trenches. So one, for example, gently shared this lesson with me and others in a small group. She said, we know that there are different citizenship statuses in the U.S., right? So rather than deny that or use a pejorative description, I prefer to describe persons who are not full citizens as underdocumented residents or as residents pursuing citizenship. These terms show respect for the basic humanity of every individual, regardless of their citizenship status. I'm going to pause my little teach-in moment for now and simply say that the approach I am proposing will not work with unreasonable people. It will not work with my way or the highway people. Hear this too, though, especially for those of us who are used to getting good grades and experiencing a lot of success. This will not work with people who cannot function without immediate success. The stakes are high, though. The time to turn this country around is limited. As we learned in working for marriage equality in the early aughts, the best chance we have for change isn't by changing the poles. It's by moving the middle. Those at the far poles on the immigration debates are not likely to make friends soon. Their minds are made up. Anybody who doesn't share their worldview is a fool. You don't have to ask. They will tell you. They will even call you a fool for trying. If you doubt that, check out my Facebook page. The best opportunity to heal this nation is by creating and conducting thousands and thousands of micro conversations among people in purple families and purple friendship circles. Why? Because these relationships are where empathy and understanding already exist and where these attributes can grow. I realize that this approach may feel foolish. This is why we need to repeat and remember Paul's guidance about the primacy of humility. In a nutshell, I offer you the encouragement of Paul, who taught us that God does not call the equipped. God equips the called. Amen.